Good evening, everyone. Is everyone fine to begin now? Yeah? Okay, great. I am aware of the time, and so we'll begin, and folks can trickle in as they may. Welcome to the American Islamic College Academic Lecture Forum. We're really honored to have with us today Dr. Muqtedar Khan. He's a professor in the Department of Political Science and International Relations at the University of Delaware. He researches and teaches Islam, governance, and international relations. He earned his PhD from Georgetown University in International Relations, Political Philosophy, and Islamic Political Thought from Georgetown. Between 2017 and 2019, he was the academic director of the State Department's National Security Institute, and he currently serves as the academic director of the State Department's American Foreign Policy Institute. He founded the Islamic Studies program at the University of Delaware and was its first director from 2007 to 2010. Dr. Khan has been a senior fellow at the Center for Global Policy since 2016. He was fellow of the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding and was also a senior non-resident fellow with the Brookings Institute and the fellow of Al-Walid Center at Georgetown. He currently comments on BBC, CNN, Fox, NPR, and other radio and TV networks. His political commentaries appear regularly in newspapers in over 20 countries. His articles on Islam and American Muslims can be read at ijtihad.org. And he joins us tonight to speak about his new book, Islam and Good Governance, A Political Philosophy of Ihsan, which we do have copies here if you would like to purchase them for $25. So there will be a book signing after the discussion. So we hope you enjoy, and we want to give a very warm welcome to Dr. Muqtedar Khan.
Thank you, Romana, for that introduction, and I want to thank American Islamic College for hosting me and at such short notice, and so I'm extremely grateful. Also delighted. I've spoken here in 2011 before, so it is interesting. Before I speak about the book, I'm not going to delve too much into details. I hope I tease you enough to motivate you to buy and read the book. If you don't even want to buy and read the book, but please try to read the book. It's available in academic libraries, etc. And there's something interesting about Palgrave books. If your library has an e-copy, then you can actually buy a paperback for next to nothing. So for example, if Northwestern has a copy, then all Northwestern students, faculty, etc. can buy a copy for very little. So that's an interesting new thing that Palgrave has done. About 7 years ago, I started flirting with the idea of writing a book on Ihsan. And the reason was because I read this hadith, Inna Allah kataba al ihsan ala kulli shay. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that we should do ihsan in everything. And you know this hadith very well. So my question was, so why not in politics? And so I started thinking of it partly because I was disenchanted by what was happening in the Arab Spring, and I was not very happy. And I was also disenchanted with governance in general across the board in the Muslim world. So I started asking this question: is how would beautiful governance look, and how would Ihsan look like if it was seriously taken into consideration in public life and public policy? So I came to Chicago and I said, let's start research at home. And Chicago has a lot of hidden Islamic resources that most Chicagoans probably don't know. So for example, there are a lot of Urdu medium madrasas here who produce alims. So I met with a couple of muftis who run these madrasas. And to my astonishment, it turns out that one of them was in the process of translating Ibn Arabi's Fusus al-Hikam. So he came and he met with me, and he was obviously angry. It took him 2 hours to come, long drive. He said, And then he asked me, so what do you want to talk about, Dr. Muqtedar? And I said, I want to talk about Ihsan. He said, why? I said, I'm writing a book on Ihsan. And he said, you can't write. Just like that. I don't think you can write a book on Ihsan. And I was quite upset. I said, I'm also an engineer and also an MBA. If I want, I can write a book on quantum physics. If I want, I can write a book on the trends in global economy. Why do you think I can't write a book on Ihsan? So he gave me a very interesting answer. He said, if you have not tasted an orange, what will you write about an orange beyond the fact that it is round and yellow? What else can you say about an orange? So if you have not experienced Ihsan, what are you going to write about it?
Very Sufi answer.
Very mystical answer. And he was right, because yes, I had read everything by then that I could lay my hands on in Urdu, in Arabic, in English on Ihsan. And a little bit of Persian too. I'm not very good at all. I don't understand it at all. But Persian writers whose work is available in Urdu, I was reading that. So it hit me very hard. And anyway, we had a very good conversation after that. And so I also dabble with the practice of tasawwuf during the course of this book, and I still do. Started preaching and giving khutbahs in masajid, etc. So I wanted you to know that that is the background to the book. My first finding while doing research for this book was that everybody has heard about Ihsan, regardless of which school of thought you come from, whether you're Salafi, whether you're Sufi, whether you're Shia, whether you're Sunni, doesn't matter. Everyone knows about Ihsan. Everyone also recognizes that Ihsan is the most important concept in the deen. It is the highest perfection of Islam, and so on and so forth, and that is beyond that. And so to me, the contradiction was that even though everyone seems to know and recognize Ihsan, I began to get this feeling that we are giving lip service to the concept and then moving away from it. So for example, every khutbah, nearly every khutbah ends with, Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan wa ita'i al qurba. I can't understand, why can't we start with that and then explain to people what it means. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded ihsan with justice. And to me, it seems that even God is saying that justice is not enough. Justice is not enough. You have to add ihsan to it. It is ihsan which completes justice. So, and then I started looking at scholarship and research. So for example, one of the most prominent Hanafi books, Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, which is attributed by many to Imam Abu Hanifa himself, talks about Islam, Iman, Deen, but not Ihsan. And to me, that was very interesting. And then I looked at Al-Ghazali, I looked at a lot of people. It was very interesting to read Ibn Taymiyyah's Kitab al-Iman. So he has 4 pages on Ihsan and 400 on Iman. And he was the first one that I could find who used the word darajat to talk about Islam, Iman, and Ihsan in this order. But then he himself in the book writes, and I quote him exactly in it, that Islam and Iman together is what our deen is all about. And he forgets in the very book. I was thrilled because his book also starts with this hadith of Islam, Iman, and Ihsan that I start. So there are more than 170 verses in the Quran which touch upon Ihsan in various conjugations. So Hasana, if you search for that, you will find many. And there are several hadiths, but the most prominent obviously is the hadith of Jibril, which is the first hadith in Sahih Muslim. And many people scholars of hadith have labeled it as Ummul Hadith or mother of all hadiths. It is a very succinct description of all things about Islam. If you want to teach about Islam, start with that hadith. And that's what I do in my classes. I make my students read the hadith of Jibril and they get very good foundation. For those of you, are you all familiar with the hadith of Jibril? If you have not, I will summarize it quickly. It's a long hadith. It starts with it is narrated by Umar ibn Khattab. There are two versions of it. One is with Abu Huraira and radiallahu anhu, and one from Umar ibn Khattab. It's a slight difference. I will tell you what the difference is as we go along. Anyway, the Sahaba are sitting with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Masjid al-Nabawi, and they see a stranger, enter the masjid. He's wearing white clothes, perfectly white clothes, pure. And that is important, these two observations, because everybody knows everybody in Medina, so this is a stranger. And if he's a stranger, that means he's come from outside. And then if he's come from outside, how come his clothes are clean? Which is why the surprise that, oh my God, because he didn't come from outside, he just appeared, I guess. So this man walks up to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, sits next to him and starts asking him questions. The first one is, Akhbarni an al-Islam, inform me, teach me, tell me what is Islam. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam answered the questions, which is the 5 pillars of Islam. The second question is, what is Iman? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam answers the question, which comes straight out of Surah Al-Baqarah. Iman is to believe in 6 things. To believe in God, to believe in His angels, to believe in His books, to believe in the Day of Judgment, to believe in His angels, and to believe in Qadr. And then the third question was, what is Ihsan? And the Prophet ﷺ gave the answer, which is the authoritative explanation of what is Ihsan. He says, أَن تَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ فَلَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ إِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ إِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. He says that Ihsan is to worship Allah as if you see Him. And if you cannot see Him, know that He sees you. Now this is, and then there are 2 more questions about the Day of Judgment. And then the man leaves, and Prophet ﷺ tells Umar, do you know who this man was? He says, I don't know. He said, that was Jibril, who came to teach you your deen. So it's a very important textual source in our faith, in our religion. And to me, it was very fascinating, because I think this is the first co-taught seminar by a prophet and an angel. First and probably the only one where a prophet and an angel are together teaching about the faith. So to me, that was very interesting. And especially if you contrast that with the Quranic story of Khidr and Musa, so you can draw some very I've discussed that in the book, you can read it. But what was to me puzzling was that if Ihsan is the most important principle, important value that we are aspiring, then why is it not paid so much more attention in the when we teach our deen to our religion, when you practice anything in governance, in institutions? After all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded it in all your actions, whatever we do. So if I were to look at the memorandum of understanding or mission statement of AIC, I should see how you plan to realize Ihsan. That should be an integral part of every Muslim institution thing. And the way we aspire, these are our aspirations. The way we would like to aspire is that all our graduate students graduate in time, and this is how we will excel. So it is, one meaning of the term is excel. I found, I'm going to read a verse to you from the Quran, and I discussed this on page 115. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The verse is, Allazi khalaq al-maut wal-hayat liyablukum ayyukum ahsanu amalan. Now, I find this ayah very interesting, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that He's the one who has created death and life. So to me, the idea of creation of death itself was quite interesting. I thought death was end of life. But no, God had to create the end of life. It's also one of God's creation, like life is. So if He had not created death, then no one would die. So it was, to me, that was a side issue, but quite interesting philosophically. So it says, He is the one who has created death and life so that He may test you to see which of you reaches the state of Ihsan. So when I read this verse in the Quran, I realized that, oh my God, this is the purpose of creation. the purpose of creation is to realize ihsan, to manifest ihsan. That is the only purpose of creation. And there are other verses in the Quran, as in chapter 11, verse 7, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and He it is who has created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and His throne was on the water that He may try you, which of you has reached again the state of ihsan. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats Himself, saying that the whole purpose of creation is for me to see who is able to realize ihsan in their life. So then the question really realizes, what is ihsan? If you go to the Quran's discussion of ihsan, and I unpack it I will show it to you. So the Quran, if you look at the Quran, the term ihsan is about doing mushahada, about bearing witness to God, about muraqaba, being self-critical, vigilant, holding yourself accountable, muhabba, that is exercising love, loving God, loving Prophet, and recognizing that He loves you, husn, that is beauty, inna Allah yuhibbul, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is jameel and He loves jamal. Inna Allah jamilun wa yuhibbul jamal. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beautiful and He loves beauty. So there is a lot about it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who do beautiful things. So, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about mercy and fana, and I will talk a little bit about epistemology, all parts from the Quran. But from hadith, we get this idea that it is about worshipping as if you see God. Some Sufis have interpreted it differently and translated the word ta'budu as to serve Allah. So ihsan is to serve Allah as if you see Him. So what is service to Allah? Service to Allah is to service to humanity. And so the concept of khidmat-e-khalq came out, and there are many Sufi traditions, especially in South Asia, who argue that service in humanity is the purpose of the deen. So khidmat-e-khalq is why we are here. So from the best, the traditional understanding, the legalistic understanding is that, once you have fulfilled your Sharia obligations and you have perfected your Iman, you believe in all the 6 things, and then when you do extra, which is the nawafil, you have achieved ihsan. So ihsan is reduced to perfection of rituals. But I think it is far, far more, and the entire Sufi tradition in Islam attests to this. In fact, Sufism is a movement among Muslims to bring ihsan in our lives. That is the best definition that I can give you of Sufism. So ihsan is 2 things. It is both a station and a condition. So a station is where you have reached that stage in life where you understand what ihsan is and what its significance is, and you aspire and work towards it. And the other part is it's a state of existence. So Ibn Arabi, for example, says that once you have sacrificed yourself or self-annihilated, you have achieved fana, then you exist only in God. So that means you are perpetually, continuously aware of God and never unaware of God. So because you're not aware of God, that is the state of ihsan. But there is this particular aspect. What does it mean to worship Allah as if you see Him? So all of this goes back to the journey of Miraj. How many of you are familiar with the journey of Miraj? According to traditions, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ actually went all the way up into heavens and had a conversation with God. For those of you who recite the At-Tahiyyat in the Salah, that is the dialogue that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had with God. And then he came back with Salah as a gift. And we have started praying 5 times a day after his return from Miraj. If you read the first 22 ayahs of Surah Al-Najm, the chapter of the star, there are indications there that on the night of the journey, Prophet Muhammad may have seen God himself. In a Muslim tradition, it's a minority position led by Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu that Prophet Muhammad actually saw God. Whereas the majority position based on a tradition which is actually an opinion of Aisha radiallahu anha that no human being can see God. We will see God only after we die, and we cannot see God in a real, as a human being. We are incapable. We are not wired to see that. So there is no way Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, could have seen God. There are many hadiths in which he's been asked directly by some companions, and he says, yes, I saw God through the eyes of my heart. But there is another interesting tradition where he says, die before you die. It's a very famous tradition known. And what it really means is to self-annihilate yourself or achieve fana. And the achieving fana is preparation to see God. So if you have already died metaphysically, then you can see God, because if you can only see God after death, then you want to die before you die so that you can see God before you die. I'm an advocate and a believer of the minority position that Prophet Muhammad actually did see God. There is a verse in the Quran which says that he saw, he was steadfast, his heart did not waver. He saw what he saw, and he saw the greatest sign of his Lord. This is very clear in the Quran. And the way the majority of Muslim scholars and the companions of the Prophet believe is that he saw Jibreel alayhi salam. With all due respect for Jibreel alayhi salam, I don't think he is the greatest sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think this creation is a much greater sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think Prophet Muhammad is a greater sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think Isa alayhi salam is a greater sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Musa, Ibrahim, all the prophets are greater manifestations of God than Jibreel. And Prophet Muhammad didn't need to go all the way to heaven to see Jibreel. Jibreel was hanging out with him for 23 years, for God's sake. He was his buddy.
And he couldn't even accompany him
Yeah,
to the highest.
exactly. So there is a point beyond which Jibreel doesn't go, and Prophet ﷺ goes there. So how did he see Jibreel? The logic is also very. So I'm persuaded that Prophet ﷺ did see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he comes back and we start praying. So when he says to worship Allah as if you see him, what he's saying is, I have seen God, and when I worship, I have seen him. That is ihsan, because he's recalling his vision of his Lord while he's praying. So our aspiration of sunnah is to pray like Rasulullah, and so we pray like him, which means we pray as if we are seeing God. So we aspire for ihsan. That is an important part. So to me, that is the most critical theological, mystical insight I have drawn from this research. That what the term ihsan means is this recognition that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had seen God in this life, even though the journey itself is out of this life. But he did see him, and therefore ihsan is to worship Allah. But how do we realize that in real life? And that is through these things. The most important way is to bear witness, to do shahada. We say, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. I mean, how do you bear witness? Do you have proof? Have you seen it? Like, what proof do you have that there is no God but Allah? This is just a belief. Yet in English, when we talk about it, and we call it shahada in Arabic also, we say we bear witness. So what does it really mean is that bearing witness is what we are supposed to do. So I found the most persuasive explanation of this coming from Ibn Arabi. And Ibn Arabi says that, relying on a tradition, that God was a hidden treasure who wanted to be known, or God was a hidden treasure who wanted to be loved, and therefore he created creation so that he may be known, and he created creation so that he may be loved. And of course, the orthodoxy simply says this is not possible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ghani, he is not dependent, he doesn't need to be loved, he doesn't need to be known. This is violating the omnipotency of God. And so that is the critique of it. But Ibn Arabi argues that because God wants to be known, he is unraveling himself. He is knowing himself through the knowers and the lovers that he has created. So this whole creation is a unveiling of God. So this is the tajalliyat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his manifestations. You know, the universe is expanding in waves, and so it's like that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is revealing himself continuously. And as he reveals himself, we need to be able to be recipients. And so he argues that the purpose of our existence is to become true mirrors who can then reflect God's image. In those days, when Ibn Arabi was writing, the mirrors were created, they were made of metal. So you would have to hammer it and polish it so that it shows that there are no... when you see yourself in a distorted mirror, it distorts the image. So the idea is to get a perfect image, it has to be perfect. And so if we want to make our heart as perfect, we have to polish it. And the polish of our heart is zikr. And many Sufis have said that zikr is the polish of our heart. So through zikr and remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we polish our hearts and we reflect. So from an Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala standpoint, if you look at the universe, everything it's nothing but one big mirror or billions of mirrors that are reflecting. So all Allah sees is his signs in his creation. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking at the creation, he's not looking at you or me. If we are doing our job well, then he is seeing himself and he's seeing his signs. And that to me is this cosmic dance of Ihsan, this cosmic creation of Ihsan. So all said that this is the mystical side of Ihsan, where if the more we assert our identity as individuals, as human beings, the more distance we create between us and the Maker. And so the idea is to not take yourself too seriously. Try to achieve fana initially until the point that the only thing that really matters is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so for example, if you notice, Musa alayhi salam sees God maybe for a fraction of a second, or did not see but fainted because of the spark, the brightness. What happened was that he basically was gone. Just one slight glimpse and it's gone. So that is fana. So he can't come back and remember and remind and describe to us what he saw. So I believe that when Prophet Muhammad also saw Allah subhanahu, it was in a much more profounder, similar reaction than Musa alayhi salam. And therefore there is no hadith with descriptions, detailed descriptions about God, because he was in a state of fana. So I want to tell you a little bit about the book itself. The book has an introductory chapter, a conclusion chapter, and 6 chapters in the book. In the first book, I do a critique of Islamic legal tradition and argue that it appears that the way our scholars are interpreting Islamic law is they look at the tradition, they look at the sunnah, and they take out everything that is beautiful, merciful, forgiving, and compassionate. Basically, they take out ihsan, and then they give it to you, the harshest possible interpretation that they can give of that law. So I look at 2 cases in it, and you should read in the book what the 2 cases are. You'll find them very fascinating because I go in great detail to show the contradiction between all the fatwas that are out there and the text on which those very same fatwas are based. So they are looking at the same resources that I'm looking, and they are expressing a very harsh interpretation, such as blasphemy laws in Pakistan. That is one case study I did. And then I took one very non-political issue about how Muslim ulama. So for example, I'll do this a little quickly. If you go and tell some sheikh, or if you Google on the web and say, how do I make up if I break my fast in the month of Ramadan by having sex with my spouse? So if you have sex with your spouse while you're fasting, it'll break. The sex is halal, but it is haram while you're fasting. So it'll break your fast. So how do I make up for it? So it happened to a man, and if you notice, everybody simply says this simple thing: fast 60 days or feed 60 people. The Hanafi says fast 60 days continuously. If you miss even one day, then you start again. So if you fast for 59 days, miss the 60th, then you have to start again, and for 60 more days. You keep fasting probably rest of your life. You might not be able to get it. Even though the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah says if you miss one fast out of sickness or out of travel, you just make up with it by one fast. But so where are these 60 days, etc. coming? They're coming from a hadith in which a man comes to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and says, Ya Rasulullah, I have been ruined because I did this. Prophet ﷺ then says, can you manumit a slave? And he says, no, I have no slaves. So he says, can you fast for 60 days? And he says, fasting is my problem. I can't do it. Even Ramadan, how can you expect me to fast 60 days outside Ramadan? Then he says, can you feed 60 people? So he says, no, I can't feed 60 poor people. And then suddenly somebody else comes in the mosque. There's some hulabaloo, and a man brings lots of dates. He's distributing, and he gives a basket of dates to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Then the Prophet turns around and says, where is that man? And the man said, I'm here. He said, so you can't feed 60 people? He says, no. He says, so okay, take this basket of dates and go feed 60 people. And the man says, Ya Rasulullah, you know that between the two mountains of Medina, there is nobody poorer than I am. So Abu Hurairah says that the Prophet's molar teeth were visible. So he literally grinned, not even smiled. He was grinning at the man and said, you know what? Why didn't you take these dates and enjoy it with your family? This is the hadith. So from this hadith, our ulama are concluding that if you break a fast, you need to fast 60 days, or you need to. But look at what the Prophet ﷺ himself did. He showed an understanding of human frailty. He showed compassion. He showed tolerance. And he also didn't get irritated when the guy now doesn't even want to share food that is given to him with poor people. He wants to keep it for himself. And instead of getting angry with him, he finds it amusing. He tells him, take it. So to me, that is ihsan. You can see ihsan in the way Prophet Muhammad ﷺ treated the man. And then our fuqaha came and took it out. If Islamic law is Quran and Sunnah, if they stick to the Quran, then one day for one missed fast. If they go into Sunnah, then they should give dates, a bag of dates for every man who breaks a fast in that way, because that is what he ultimately did. So how do you draw that law? Like, why do we have to take this tradition and interpret it in the harshest possible way, is my question. And then I show that in other issues, in blasphemy, in adultery, in fornication, in every other issue, we are interpreting the existing sources in the harshest possible way. So that's one thing that I'm arguing, that there is a loss of ihsan in the way we practice Islam, and particularly in the way we articulate what is the Sharia, creating a dichotomy between Sharia and ihsan. Ihsan begins to look more and more compassionate and loving. Sharia begins to look more and more harsh. No wonder that none of you would like to go and live in a country which says it's implementing the Sharia. Would you like to move to Iran? Would you like to move to Saudi Arabia? Would you like to go to Pakistan? If you're a minority, you're finished. Imagine the blasphemy laws there. So why does it look as if that Islamic law is so harsh? Because we are interpreting it by excluding ihsan. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of backlash from the fuqaha, but they need to realize that that is an argument they need to recognize and deal with it. In the second chapter, I argue about the rise of political Islam and Islamic resurgence in the last 150 years. All these Islamic movements have made Islam an identity and an ideology. Islam is not communism. Islam is not capitalism. Islam is, no, we don't want capitalism. We don't want communism. We want Islam. So that is what they are trying to advocate, that Islam is now an ideology, Islam is an identity, and Islam should be a reservoir of values that we practice. It should be a reservoir of values that we practice, not an identity that we wear. So we made it a prefix. We want Islamic State, we want Islamic economics, we want Islamic dating, Islamic organization. So for example, one of the schools, Islamic schools that I know, is called Alhamd Islamic School. And I was wondering, can there be any other Alhamd school which is not Islamic? Can you have an Alhamd non-Islamic school, Alhamd secular school? You're already calling it Alhamd school, but they call it Alhamd Islamic school because the identity of the school is what the customers are looking for, not the name Alhamd. And what does it do? It produces Muslims who are measured by their identity. Do the teachers wear hijab? Do the students wear hijab? Do the boys get to wear, some Islamic clothes and memorize the Quran, etc.? So that is the second part. In the third and fourth is where I discuss Ihsan. In the third chapter here, I discuss nearly every way in which Muslims have talked about Ihsan. So I look at the Sufi traditions, the regular orthodoxies, various Sunni traditions. I look at how Ihsan is discussed in Ahadith. I look at how Ihsan is discussed in the Quran. I also look at how Ihsan is discussed by various Muslim scholars in the past, in the present, in the East, and in the West. So a very systematic and long literature review of Ihsan. So you get a sense of how many different ways in which Muslims have understood. And then in the next chapter called Unveiling Ihsan, I offer my understanding of what is Ihsan. And I also show as to how in the past Muslim scholars have deliberately tried to avoid talking about Ihsan, try to exclude Ihsan from the conversation, try to even direct Muslims away from Ihsan because I think they fear that it will lead to Sufism. And they don't want Muslims to become Sufis, so they are avoiding talking about Ihsan because the path, how do you achieve Ihsan? You have to talk about tasawwuf, otherwise you will not. Second last chapter, I do a survey of Islamic political thinking in the Muslim world, historically and contemporary, and show basically that in the past there was a huge diversity of Islamic thought, and in the present there is a huge diversity of Islamic thought, especially political thought. So there's no one conception of an Islamic state or one conception of a Muslim polity which is the right one or the halal one. So for example, I look at from the classical scholars, these 5 scholars who have interpreted Islamic politics: Farabi ibn Khaldun, Mawardi ibn Taymiyyah, and Sheikh Sadi. And then in the modern period, I look at these nation state, Islamic caliphate, and Islamic democracy. I found the most interesting thing that I found was that Muslim scholars in the past advanced Islamic theories of the state. Okay? In the past, they had Islamic theories of the state. Today, we have theories of the Islamic state. So the Islamic has moved. It went from Islamic theories of the state to theories of the Islamic state. There again, the identity of the state, not its moral content, is more important. So how do you become an Islamic state? Because you make the women wear hijab or chador, and then you have a particular flag, say La ilaha illallah on it, and then that's it. That's your Islamic state for you. So, and then in the last chapter, I talk about how Ihsan can shape good governance in Muslim societies. And I will summarize that quickly. And I divide that into 2, what is the state and what is society. So I argue that I have these 10 points, and that Muslims need to stop talking about Tawheed but talk about sovereignty. Then move away from talking about righteous caliphs as role models, but talk about Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as the governing role model. When you talk about Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, then you can talk about the Constitution of Medina, etc. Then you move from structure to process, national interest to national virtue, and then move from treating virtue as an individual quality to a social quality. So people will say, oh, he's a just individual. It doesn't matter if the individual is just, if the society has inequity in it, unequal treatment of population, men or women, Muslims or Muslims, black and white, all of those inequities show that there is no social justice in society. That is what we should look at, and not whether the individual is a just or not. To me, it doesn't make sense to say he is a just individual. And then I talk about society of Muslims, which is essentially a theory of citizenship. I argue that citizens should be seen as witnesses, citizens as character builders, citizens as those who move away from enforcement of law to self-regulation. To me, this is very important. And then I talk about how we can move from God governance to good governance. I want to delve a little bit about what I mean by Sharia by Shura. I think that if we impose Sharia and say, I know what Sharia is and I'm going to make you forcibly follow it, it's not going to work. That's why the Islamic so-called Khulafa Rashidin's period didn't last even 30 years. This is what, 1444th year of Islamic Hijri, and we have had true Islamic governance only for 30 years. And we claim that only by shutting down anybody who wants to look at that period critically. You are dead if you start looking at it critically. There were 2 civil wars, 3 civil wars, how many civil wars? In Abu Bakr's whole period, the biggest thing was a civil war. During Usman's period, uprisings and protests, assassinations. Yet we want to see it as a perfect. I mean, would you want to live in societies where there's so much upheaval and drama going on? There is no peace or stability. Hazrat Ali's entire 6 years were like war after war after war. So yet we want to say this is the best period, this is the best form of governance in Islamic. And so how can we make it a model if we don't look at it critically? So we need to move away to the 10 years of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, look at the Constitution of Medina, etc. Now with Sharia by Shura, I argue that laws cannot be, if you impose laws, it is tyranny. So laws has to be developed in consultation through Shura. So let's decide what is the Sharia by which we will live. You are free to bring in and say, I want to follow Ibn Taymiyyah's understanding. Great. You can say, I want to follow Ibn Arabi's, and I can say, let's follow the text of the Quran, and you can say, let's follow this particular collection of hadiths. Fine. Let's all then debate about this and agree upon what we all want to be governed. If all of us, or a significant majority of us agrees, then there will be peace and stability. And it's not as if Sharia has not in the past been articulated by Shura. Notice how we got our azan through consultation process. Azan didn't come from the Quran, it comes from the Sunnah, but the Sunnah was, how should we do it? How should we call people to pray? Should we ring a bell or not? So Bilal comes up with the idea of giving an azan and calling it out, and so it becomes part of the Sharia. Now you try having a prayer with an azan in the masjid and see how many lectures on Sharia you will get. We have fights about whether there should be 3 azans or 2 azans for Jummah. What is the Sharia on that really? So I think that is what we need to aspire, and the way we can bring ihsan is by trying to educate the society to realize those values that I show as part of ihsan. So I'm going to stop now and be happy to take questions and answers. Yes, brother.
More or less a reaction, political is more or less a reaction, a reaction against colonialism.
Yeah.
So they did everything, it's like reactionary. So, like you say, if you could go back, the model is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahabas, the first, 4 caliphs. They are the example. Like you said, we need to go back to that and ensure, because that's it, in the last 150 years, because of colonialism, see that everything political is reactionary. of colonialism. So,
I talk about colonialism and also the advent of modernity in the book. And I argue that the Muslims have these four responses to modernity. So the first is a secular response that you see in Ataturk and you see in Turkey to some extent, to Tunisia to some extent. The idea is to basically abandon Islam, make it, push it out as much as possible from the culture, etc. They wanted to ape the West. And as a political model, they resorted to nationalism and accepted the nation state as a model. And nationalism became the way to create asabiya essentially in society. Then you had three Muslim responses. The traditionalists felt that modernization, modern world, colonization essentially ruined the degree of piety of Muslims. If Muslims become more, this happened because we are not good Muslims. If we become good Muslims, then we'll automatically become bosses of the world. That is the theory, and they come up with things like the Tablighi Jamaat. So you basically come back and practice rituals, and that is the adherence to rituals is their conception of piety. You know, grow your beards, dress like Arabs or Pakistanis, and go to the mosque, and then everything will be hunky dory. Well, there are places where there are hundreds of thousands of people who are members of Jamaat Islami, and there are societies of Tablighi Jamaat, and those are societies which also suffer a lot more. Across the board, you can see the Muslim world is just, it's like a chronicle of suffering as much as possible. Then you have the second one, which is Islamist. Islamist diagnosis is modernization and colonization has led to loss of power. Muslims have no power to shape their own destiny. They need to get power back. And that is why the focus is on Islamic State or Islamic Caliphate. We want to get our power back. So if we get our power back, then we can then make this Islamic State will then lead to revival of Muslim Ummah, etc. And we have seen how well they have done in Iran and other places. The third one is modernists like Iqbal and Sir Syed Ahmed Khan and Muhammad Abdu, Sayyid Nursi and others part of the world, who argue that it's not about power or piety, it's about process. We have lost certain processes, such as governing by shura and doing ijtihad. And if Muslims can bring ijtihad back and they can do shura, etc., then Muslims will become intellectually vibrant, and so our societies will begin to renew. And therefore, their solution is to bring back Islam, to create Islamic democracies. I kind of fall into that bracket for a long time until this mystical turn. I was an Islamic modernist. So I think that you're right, that everything that Muslims have been doing is a reaction to loss of power, not just worldly power, but we also have lost control, if we ever had, in the direction of history. We don't shape history anymore. We don't even remember our time. We remember date in Western dates. If I want to know what the Islamic date is, I'll have to look at my iPhone to figure it out. My daughter was 9 years old when I discovered that she was born on 12th Rabiul Awwal. She shares her birthday with Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I'd already celebrated 11 of her birthdays. I didn't know until one day now there are conversion tables, and that's how I found out. Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I really enjoyed your talk, so thank you so much. And this is one of the reasons I always come here, because this is what brought me to Islam. It was people like this institution. So thank you. So my question is, as someone who converted to Islam, I don't use the word revert. I'm not ashamed that I converted, because I didn't believe this until I'm a convert. But as someone who converted to Islam, it seems like the choices I've been given is, and I converted because I wanted this. I wanted Islam. I wanted that. But it seems like the choices I've been given is either be a sort of caricature of the 10th century Muslim, or um, become a part of some highly intellectual philosophical discourse. And I just came because I wanted to save me. I wanted to save my life. I wanted to become a better human being. Do you think the reason for that is, has the community, have Muslims just lost touch? I mean, have they lost the technology that used to produce great people? Like, for instance, the story of Ali, when the guy spit in his face and he didn't kill him. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, what?
Well, this is not something that only Muslims worry about. Every culture is worried about decline. We want to make America great again. So we are worried about the decline of America. We want to do Islah and Tajdeed. That's what Trump wants, right? He wants to reform the society and he wants to get rid of all non-white people. That is how he thinks he is going to purify. So you can see the trends are there. Everybody has different solutions. But I think that Muslims are performing a very strange form of shirk. They have created a new God in competition with Allah. And this God is Islam. We now worship Islam and not Allah. So if you just Google Islam and look at Google images, Islam will dominate, Islam will win, Islam. Like, who is Islam? For God's sake, we have personified Islam. No one says that Allah will dominate, Allah will do this. It's all about Islam, 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 Islam. Islam is a collective identity. Islam is an institution. Islam is a tribe. Islam is. So I think it's a very subtle point that I'm trying to make, but I think this deviation where we have made Islam more important than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for example, if you ask somebody, I'm going to get into trouble with this, I'm sure now. Yes.
You're already in trouble.
So if you say that, who is a Muslim? They'll say anyone who believes in La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, the believer, right? So are Jews believers? And they'll say no. Some will say Ahl al-Kitab here in America. But in most of the Muslim world, they will say no, certainly not. And they are more sympathetic to Christians than to Jews. But theologically, Jews are also people who believe in one God. They believe in La ilaha illallah. So what we are telling when we reject them is, I really don't care whether you believe in one God or not. What really matters to me is whether you believe in Muhammad or not. Did you get that? So we have again moved the bar on the litmus test of who matters. There is one very beautiful hadith in which Prophet Muhammad falls into a fetus position and keeps saying that it is enough to say La ilaha illallah. It's enough to say La ilaha illallah. As long as you believe in one God, that is enough. But we add things. It's not enough to believe in that. You need to believe in Prophet Muhammad. It's not enough to believe that. You have to believe in the ahadith, the correct sitta sahih, and then you have to believe in this. You have to believe in Ali, and then you have to believe in my sheikh, etc., etc., etc. And it all then comes down to our imam at the masjid, So we are creating these semi-gods, demigods, and all the way and made Islam also a god. And I think that's deviated. It's taken us away from God. The whole purpose of this creation and these religious messages that God has sent. Think of religions as God saying, where the hell are you? Come to me. That's what religion is. Like, why you forgotten me? Come to me. Look at me. I am here. I'm here. I love you. Love me, So that's what religion is. We have forgotten that the end goal is God, not domination of religion or my mosque or stuff. So I think that is the problem. The other thing is that we also have this very strange thing now in this era where Muslims say, you want to know true Islam? Go read it in the library. Don't look at Muslims. Really? it's a very strange thing. Even Muslims are rejecting the lived Islam. So we would rather want you to go and read John Esposito's books to know what real Islam is than come to the masjid or come to a Muslim country. And I mean, John is my mentor, but at least he's not taken a public shahada. So you're saying go read John Esposito, but not, come to Muslims. We should not need to talk about these things, People should say, oh, I want to be like this brother. I want to be like this. Oh, he's so reliable. I wish we had more people like him in our community. It would be better off. Chicago is in turmoil in so many ways. And there are so many Muslims in Chicago, and you have not brought Sakina to this city. Bala bi zikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. Indeed, it is through the remembrance of God that hearts find contentment. There are more than 500,000 Muslims. If you're doing zikr here, there should be contentment in this city. You should take the blame for the turmoil in it. You have to be at peace and calm. There's no ihsan. And I think we need, one of the things I argue in the book is we have to fundamentally change the way we think in it. When I was talking about epistemology, there's an ayah in the 39th chapter of the Quran which says, when you read religious texts, you should interpret it in the most beautiful way. And I don't think we are interpreting Islam in the most beautiful way. In fact, with the emergence of groups like ISIS, we seem to be manifesting the harshest possible ways in which Islam. Technically, you can't call them un-Islamic. Some of us would lose debates to those people when you just look at the sources, if you follow the methodologies that are masqueraded as Islamic today. Our tradition is at fault for producing them because we have avoided ihsan. So that is my contribution, is to go back and we need to reinvent the wheel and not forget to put ihsan into it.
But why was ihsan taken out? And why was ihsan taken out from the Bible?
See, part of it, I think, is the aversion that people have developed to Sufism over the centuries. And I spent a lot of time with the Sufis, and I am not recommending any Sufi order. I don't even, I feel they have betrayed ihsan. Others don't know about ihsan. These guys know about it, and they have betrayed it in a bigger way. They have reduced their religion to sheikh worship. It's all about their leader. I sat in a meeting with a group of Sufis who regaled me with the stories of their shuyukh who died 100 years ago, 200 years ago, who were great warriors for social justice, and these jokers were just sitting in the room and just telling stories about dead people. I said, the world is so unjust out there. Why aren't you out there fighting for social justice if this is what you are following your shuyukh to do? So I think that, just as people move their eyes from God and are focusing on law and institution and power and state, the Sufis have really fallen so badly that their eyes have moved away from God and now focused only on their immediate sheikhs. And to me, that is just... See, to put it very simply, to live life of ihsan is to live life as if you have made eye contact with God. And don't for a moment take your eyes away, would you? Imagine yourself as a young man having a crush over some young girl, and you make an eye contact. Would you like that eye contact to break? No. Obviously not. The brother is shaking his head. No. You would be in agony if you break eye contact and then don't reconnect. Now imagine that. The goal is to make eye contact with God and then never break it. That is fana fil Allah, and then baqa, remain and continue. We have forgotten that is our goal. We want to impose laws, cover people's heads, beat people for not praying, throw them from buildings because we don't like their lifestyles. Just look at yourself first, before. There are lots of things that I discovered about our tradition that was very worrying to me that over the years. And it tells me that the solution is not simple. It will take generations for us to make course correction. Muslims in the West have an opportunity where we can have seminars like this, we can discuss. And intuitively, American Muslims are discovering and rediscovering Ihsan. For example, when I was doing research, I found that nearly every major known Muslim preacher out there, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Faraz Rabbani, Umar Farooq from this city, Yasser Qadi, all of these very popular big names, they have all given khutbahs on Ihsan. I think far more than maybe in the last 100 years in the entire Muslim world, they have talked about Ihsan much, much more. But then that stops. It's like, okay, I've done this topic, now let me get to the next topic. No, once you have discovered Ihsan, why would you go anywhere else? Why would you talk about anything else? Why you want to talk about nail paint and lipstick next Jummah? Come on. So that is, I think, the challenge for us. And I feel blessed that I was able to spend so many years studying and writing about it. And I hope people read it and they don't have to agree with everything, but at least acknowledge that Ihsan is, God has given us a very beautiful way to live life, and we can pursue that at the minimum. Someone told me that the most beautiful thing to achieve in heaven is to listen to Rahman reciting Rahman. So listening to God recite the surah of Rahman. That is heaven, not 70 wives or rivers under the water and fruits. Oh, those are all material projections of what heaven is. It's unthinkable, just as from a philosophical perspective, and this is not something new that I am saying. Most religious thinkers have realized that God is theoretically unknowable for us as human beings. We cannot know God. We can know of Him. Even probably in the life next, we can, because as long as we are separate from Him, we cannot know Him. You have to be one with Him. Then it's not knowing Him, because then you don't exist. It's like this very commonly used metaphor about a drop in the ocean. As long as the drop can be separated from the ocean, it's not part of the ocean. Once you put it, it's gone. Right? You cannot get that drop back. And that is what fana is, and that is what knowing ultimately God is returning to God. That's why, so if you imagine there's nothing but God and then everything emanates from God, then so it's like the universe is expanding and contracting, then that's why we say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We come from Allah, then we return to Allah. And that's fana. Any other questions, comments?
Just
to say,
one point with regard to Ihsan itself. Of course, Ihsan, it's the masdar, it's the gerund of the fourth form of ahsana. To make beautiful, to make better, to make, I mean, there are several ways to translate it. But one of the most common meanings in the Quran of ihsan, and it's not the only meaning, doesn't seem to be caught in what you portrayed today, but I know you had to skip a number of things, and that is charity, absolute charity, or I mean, for example, you say ihsan lil walidain. I mean, goodness towards your parents. I mean, and it's an aspect of goodness towards your source, towards your origins as well.
See, one of the most common, I mean, the Quran says, "Ahsanu, inna Allaha yuhibbul muhsinin." That's exactly where you're coming from, right? The way we have translated it is, do good deeds, and Allah loves those who do good deeds. But ahsanu is to become better, to make it better, to make yourself better, right? There's a tradition in which Prophet Muhammad said, if you are the same person 2 days in a row, consider yourself a loser. Min al khasirun. He actually used the word loser. He said, if you are the same person 2 days in a row, consider yourself a loser. Which means we should not even waste the 24 hours that we have to do ihsan, to make yourself better, more beautiful. When you read At-Tahiyyat, I found it so interesting that even when Rasulullah is talking to God, he doesn't forget us. He includes us in his conversation with God, and to me that is an incredible manifestation. When I meet a celebrity, I forget my family. Imagine having a conversation with God and you are still remembering your ummah. So the goodness part is there. Yes.
Many definitions of ihsan in the Quran. Of course, wide varieties in which the ha, sin, nun has been used. And there is an antonym for certain definitions. What would be the opposite meaning when ihsan comes as it came in the hadith of defining al-iman and Islam and iman and ihsan? What would be the opposite of that? Did you find any?
Yeah, I think ghafala, to become a ghafil.
For example, when I contemplate the word, when you talked about ahsan, خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم ثم رددناه أسفل سافلين. The opposite is what? Is it the highness and lowness? For example, الحسن والقبيح, and then المحسن والمسيء, وحسنة and سيئة.
الحسن والخبيث.
والحسن جميل and قبيح. Yeah. But what is the
kind of
opposite for this?
To me, it is ghafil, to momentarily forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
But you still, even if you would do ghafla as opposite of ihsan in that context, then you're still mu'min, because you are still Muslim and mu'min.
You just drop
ihsan is the highest degree. But if you drop from ihsan...
Oh, you're looking in terms of, you're looking at zenith and nadar, like that, right? I think to forget God is, I think, unforgivable in my mind.
Then dhikr would be opposite of forgetting.
Yeah, and that is why zikr, so zikr, yeah, but zikr is why it is through zikr that you polish your heart and make it perfect, and then reflect the tajalliyat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through zikr. But there is also this denial of, see, when you say ka'annaka tarahu, as if you have seen him, I think the opposites are in it. The Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw, we didn't. And our aspiration is to still pray as if we saw him, right? So that is the range. I also believe that the minimum of Islam is adl, and the other extreme is ihsan. Anything below adl is, to me, gone, right? So this is the range of ihsan. So in that sense, but it's very interesting how I mean, the way you posed the question, I never thought of it in that way as to what is the linguistic opposite of ihsan. But to me, conceptually, it is forgetfulness of God. Because to live a life as a Mohsin is to live life as if you are in eye contact with God. So to me, to take my eyes away. So for example, Ibn Arabi talks about tawajjuh, right? He's trying to say that human beings are like holograms. So as long as you're projecting the human being, he or she exists. You turn the projector off, the existence is gone. So this projection is the tawajjuh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As long as He's paying attention to us, we exist. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to take His attention off from us, we will cease to exist. This whole universe will cease to exist. It's the tawajjuh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is the exactly thing. I think that to be in a state of ihsan is to have complete tawajjuh towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ghafla is to take your eye off. It's like you look at your iPhone while you're driving, you have an accident. And I think that is what is happening. You take your eyes off from that eye contact that we would like to make with. So that is ghafla, when you've forgotten Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even for a moment. And I recognize that. I mean, it's theoretical, metaphysical, aspirational. But I would like to have more moments in my life when I think of nothing but Allah. I would have more moments, more longer moments, prolonged those moments. That's why we do zikr, we do salah, we pray nafil, we do other things, but try to bring them into our mundane life. To me, that is the whole idea of to do ihsan in everything.
I was just going to talk about zikr.
Go ahead.
You already really covered it. You just remember it's movements of Allah. Because if you remember a lot, you won't forget. You become God conscious.
I don't know whether you know
His
this.
whole aim is to become, God conscious, where we're always remembering Allah.
You know this.
The Prophet says, he said, pray, you're not even for one blink of an eye, it has my ego. So, once you forget, you say, oh.
Yeah.
So, that's the whole purpose. Someone told me, they criticized me and said, you're not teaching me Quran and Sunnah. All you talk about is dhikr. I said, well, that's the whole aim of everything is to remember Allah, constantly. When you die, you become God conscious. Where everything in creation is praising Allah. When we want to become our every cell, every atom, innocently praising and making tasbih to Allah. But we want to become conscious, when we are doing this consciously all the time. And I think that's what the whole object is. So remember Allah constantly.
So there is somebody yesterday asked me a very interesting question as to what's the difference between taqwa and ihsan. So it's an interesting question, being God conscious or fearing God all the time as opposed to loving God all the time and being aware. So, and then he also made it more complicated by saying, okay, now how will you apply that in the public arena and public policy discussions? So at that point, I could come up with only this metaphor. I said, imagine children playing together. And if one of the kids' dad is in the room or mom is in the room, their behavior is transformed by the awareness of the presence, the panopticon effect that they are being watched and they are aware of. So because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is both shahid and mashud, and not only are we witnessing him, but he is also bearing witness to what we do. So there is this awareness. Now this awareness which modifies your behavior so that you are at your best behavior could be from a desire, from fear of your dad, or a desire to please your dad and seek your dad's approval. But from the desire that, oh my God, if I'm at my best behavior, then he will be happy with me. And that is my happiness. I'm going to end with a short story. There is a story about a Sufi who is...
For the love of my pregnant program officer, make it a very short.
Very short, 30 seconds. There is a Sufi who's sitting and he's doing his zikr, and he hears a voice which says that if I tell people what I know about you, they will stone you. So you can imagine God is trying to blackmail him or scaring him and saying, if I tell people what you did, they will stone you. So you can imagine what the Sufi might have done. The Sufi is not troubled at all. He's just cool, he's relaxed, and he says, if I tell people what I know about you, they will stop fasting, they will stop praying, they will stop giving zakat, nobody will go to Hajj. So he has something bigger on God. And that is that God is so compassionate that he will forgive everybody. So once you believe that God is so compassionate that he will forgive you and says, oh Adam, if your sins are bigger than the mountains, just ask me forgiveness, I will forgive you no matter how much sins you do. If you genuinely believe that idea, then why would you do things to please Allah? Because now the fear of Allah is gone. It is the love of Allah that motivates you. That is ihsan. Thank you.